And the next item of business is a debate on motion 18079 in the name of Shirley-Ann Somerville on the legislative consent motion, Public Authorities, Fraud, Error and Recovery Bill, UK legislation. I would invite those members who would wish to seek to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Shirley-Ann Somerville, Cabinet Secretary, to speak to and to move the motion. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm pleased to be able to come to the Chamber today to debate this LCM. As I recently noted to the Social Justice and Social Security Committee, I have a responsibility to ensure that legislation impacting on devolved social security system is fully compatible with our principles and ethos. I'm also mindful of practical implications of any legislative changes and how they might impact on the safe and secure transition of benefits. I have scrutinised this bill and the ramifications carefully and have engaged with the UK Government, and I now recommend consent in the following areas. On entry, search and seizure, these provisions will allow the DWP to apply to a sheriff for a warrant to enter premises, search for and seize items when investigating serious cases of fraud. Currently, the DWP require the police to undertake this action on their behalf, and I am content that nothing within these particular provisions runs contrary to the ethos and principles underpinning our devolved social security system. On data gathering with regard to these provisions, the UK Government have broadly mirrored the approach pioneered in our devolved social security system, and because of this, and because the provisions contain similar safeguards and exemptions around third sector organisations, I am content to recommend consent. On eligibility verification measures, the provisions in relation to this will allow the DWP to require organisations such as banks and financial institutions to provide data to establish an individual's entitlement to benefits and identify incorrect payments. It will be of reassurance, I hope, to Parliament today to know that the UK Government have confirmed in writing that there is no intention to include devolved benefits within the scope of this measure now or in the future. On changes to administrative penalties, there is no equivalent to administrative penalties within the devolved system, and I am therefore content to recommend consent. Now, the overpayment recovery is an important aspect, and although the provisions were referred to in the memorandum accompanying this motion, the Scottish Government did not take a position on consent. This was to allow due consideration of the impact of these provisions on Scottish clients and for ongoing discussions with the UK Government. I fully recognise the duty of governments to ensure that overpayments are recovered wherever it is reasonable to do so, but this cannot be at the expense of our values and ethos. As I confirmed to the committee, I have concluded that it would not be appropriate to recommend consent for the overpayment recovery provisions. These provisions allow direct recovery from bank accounts with no need for a court order and potential suspension of driving licences. No such provisions exist within the devolved system, and I do not consider them compatible with the ethos of fairness, dignity and respect. I have confirmed this position in writing to UK ministers, who in response have confirmed that they will seek to amend the bill such that devolved benefits are removed from the scope of these provisions. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government did not see the full provisions of this bill until it was introduced on the 22nd of January 2025, and this meant that normal timeframes for lodging this legislative consent memorandum could not be met. As a result, and due to the ongoing engagement still required to understand where the bill and its numerous amendments will impact on Scotland, I can confirm that there will be a requirement to lodge a supplementary LCM for the bill in due course. I will at that time be happy to provide a fuller update on the overpayment recovery provisions as part of that supplementary LCM, and I move the motion, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I now call on Colette Stevenson on behalf of the Social Justice and Social Security Committee.
Very grateful, Presiding Officer, and thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this debate on behalf of the Social Justice and Social Security Committee. According to the UK Government, the overarching policy objective of the Public Authorities Fraud, Error and Recovery Bill is to safeguard the public purse against fraud and error. The bill seeks to help the UK Government address losses due to fraud and error occurring outside the tax and benefits systems. It also introduces new powers to help the Department for Work and Pensions address fraud and error in the social security system and recover overpayment debt. The LCM sets out the aspects of the bill which apply to those devolved benefits delivered under agency agreement with the Department for Work and Pensions. The Scottish Government established agency agreements to enable the DWP to continue to administer benefits on the Scottish Government's behalf until Social Security Scotland's equivalent benefits had been created, and those in receipt of benefits administered by the DWP had been transferred to Social Security Scotland. The Scottish Government expects to complete the transfer of benefits by the end of this year, except for two benefits: the Severe Disablement Allowance and the Industrial Injuries Benefits. The committee welcomed confirmation from the Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice that the transfer of cases for devolved benefits would be completed prior to the provisions of the UK Bill coming into force. The Scottish Government is asking Parliament to consent only to the relevant provisions included in the LCM. Clauses 88 to 95 and Schedule 5 relate to the overpayment, debt recovery and enforcement. The Scottish Government is not seeking legislative consent for those provisions. The bill contains provisions in relation to eligibility verification measure. If consent was granted, those provisions would allow the DWP to request large data sets from organisations such as banks in order to identify those in receipt of benefits who do not meet the relevant eligibility criteria. The Cabinet Secretary confirmed that there is no intention from either the Scottish Ministers or the UK Government to add devolved benefits to the scope of these powers. The bill also contains provisions in relation to overpayment recovery, and if consent was granted, those provisions would provide the DWP with new options for enforcing recovery of overpayments when other routes of recovery have failed. This would include recovering direct from an individual bank account. Individuals could also be disqualified from driving for a period of up to 2 years if they have an outstanding overpayment and all other recovery attempts have failed. The Cabinet Secretary told the committee that the UK Government had confirmed its intention to amend the bill to exempt Scottish devolved benefits from the scope of the new overpayment recovery powers. It would be helpful to know when those amendments might be expected. It would also be helpful if the Cabinet Secretary is able to confirm whether the Scottish Government intends to lodge a supplementary LCM, and if so, the provisions it would relate to. Following the evidence received, the Social Justice and Social Security Committee was content to recommend to the Parliament that consent be given for the relevant provisions covered by LCM S6-55. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Stevenson. I now call on Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Every penny of public money lost to fraud or error is a penny taken from the Scottish taxpayer and returned to school hospitals and those they rely on. The Government has the responsibility to ensure that every penny is raised and is effective. That is why the Scottish Conservatives support the legislative consent motion before Parliament today. Fraud in the public sector undermines public trust. It is also a matter of financial loss or corrodes the public's confidence in the payment system. It weakens the social contract which people have when they pay their taxes and they see the system failing. Fraudsters exploiting the system puts support of genuine vulnerable individuals at risk. That is why we welcome the action to modernise and strengthen the fraud-fighting toolkit. The measures outlined in this report today ensure that the public funds will be measured and that there will be a fair system for recipients alike. We recognise that a number of the bills engage with the competence of the Parliament, particularly in relation to benefits delivered under the agency agreements. We also support the provisions being supported by the Scottish Government and the DWP to ensure that benefits on behalf of Scottish ministers may also be the tool to tackle fraud and look at what's happening across the rest of the United Kingdom. The eligibility verification measures will allow the Government to ask common sense, proactive questions and simplify the criteria. There are significant issues that will come from the rules that are outlined today. At the same time, it is not overburdensome and the DWP will have access to see how things support. We believe it is a reasonable balance that will be struck to ensure that these organisations involved. The information of civil recovery and the asset seizing of the bill is also very positive, Presiding Officer. Law enforcement agencies agencies must be able to recover fraudulent obtained funds and seize high value brought to the stolen money. It's simply wrong that individuals who defraud are allowed to purchase, for example, luxury items because they've spent the money quickly. If there is to be a deterrent, then there needs to be consequences as well. The measures give the enforcement legal powers to ensure that they're swift, effective. To be clear, there is some real strong safeguards of independent oversight mechanisms that accompany the introduction of these powers. That is fair and that is right for Scotland, Presiding Officer. The course that was set out in this ensures that the Scottish Government and the UK Government themselves will retain powers. We hope that this can be resolved, and we also look forward to seeing the agency taking forward with the Social Security Scotland, who will focus their costs and disruption that may take place. The bill that is supported has honest, hard-working individuals. It will also ensure that errors that happen, and there are many errors that are across the system that need to be sorted. The Scottish Conservatives want to ensure that every penny is supporting frontline workers, regardless of the debates. The bill itself strikes the balance between fairness and also firmness to ensure that the Parliament has the rights and obligations to deal with. Let us send a clear message that it's the side of the taxpayer we want to ensure, and that bill does this. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Stewart. I now call on Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful, Presiding Officer, and it's a pleasure to contribute to this short debate on the Public Authorities Fraud, Error and Recovery Bill and the accompanying Legislative Consent Motion, or LCM. And can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for the very clearly articulated explanation of where the position we are with regard to this LCM, and the fact there may well be required to be a supplementary LCM when other areas are identified and settled on. And it's right to remember that the proposal behind this bill, to draw on Alexander Stewart's contribution, is to both prevent and deter fraud and error. And it's also to facilitate the recovery of those funds where, through fraud and error, money has been lost, as Alexander Stewart so rightly put, from the taxpayer. It is also a focus on the DWP. But on top of that, it also establishes the Public Sector Fraud Authority, which will be a body that deals with that matter going forward. But to the purposes of the LCM today, can I thank both the committees in this Parliament that have worked on it, along with the Scottish Government, and the work that they have put in discussing with the UK Government the outstanding matters, which in many ways can be simplified but does not deter from the importance of this, that those benefits that are awarded and given in Scotland through the devolved powers are exempt from the recovery described in the bill. And the UK Government have both confirmed and amended the bill, but also have given undertakings to ensure that it is not covered. So with that matter, and again perhaps to the embarrassment, I hope, of Alexander Stewart, can I echo his final words on it in this matter? Let us send a clear message that those who are entitled to benefits are entitled to it, but those who, through fraud and error on occasions, recover should seek to return those funds to where they are. But because, and to discuss the difference in approaches which we have here in Scotland, those benefits under the Scotland are specifically excluded by this bill. I'm grateful, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Whitfield. I now call on Maggie Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Greens cannot agree to this LCM this evening. Part 2 of the Public Authorities Fraud, Error and Recovery Bill assumes that all recipients of benefits have criminal tendencies and must therefore be denied financial privacy. That's a quote. Those aren't my words, Presiding Officer, but those of Labour's Lord Seeker speaking in the House of Lords about this bill just last month. Scottish Greens reject that assumption outright and so cannot support this LCM. In addition, we cannot agree to any legislation that gives snooping rights to banks and other companies in the way enabled by this bill, even if not all of those powers will be explicitly allowed in Scotland. No court order would be needed for this new unrestrained surveillance, and individuals wouldn't be told they are being surveilled. There would be no right of appeal by those affected, and it's also not clear what information would actually be identified by this surveillance, or how fraud would be determined on the basis of that information. And because individuals wouldn't even know this was happening, they would have no chance to provide any explanation for their situation. And what if that algorithm used to identify that information makes a mistake? The Post Office scandal has surely taught us that computer systems are not infallible. Even a 1% error rate could result in over 1,000 people losing universal credit. How would they be compensated? How would they challenge this, given the widespread and ongoing issues with lack of access to legal aid? While this legislation initially allows snooping on recipients of universal credit, pension credit and others, it is likely to be extended to other benefits too, even if not those specifically devolved and in the control of the Social Security Scotland. All of this is to tackle fraud, which of course we know only accounts for a couple of % of annual welfare spending. Powers to snoop on all claimants on the basis of this tiny rate cannot be justified. And the DWP already has powers to compel information holders to share data on individuals suspected of fraud. So I, like Lord Seeker, question whether these powers actually are necessary. In short, Presiding Officer, the bill removes financial privacy from the poor, the old, the sick and the disabled. It is discriminatory. It turns on its head our normal presumption that people are innocent until proven guilty, and it makes a mockery of our equality and human rights laws. As such, we in the Greens cannot support this LCM this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. I now call on the Cabinet Secretary to wind up the debate.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I thank the committee for their deliberations when we initially discussed this some weeks ago, and to the members that have taken part today. A number of members have pointed out that this is about the prevention and the deterrence of fraud and error, and that is a very important part of any social security system. Maggie Chapman is quite right to point out that a very, very small minority of people abuse the social security system, and we must always appreciate and understand that context. But it is important that for those who do, or for those who even think about abusing that system that we hold most dear, that there must be a zero tolerance to the approach to fraud, as long as we have that zero tolerance approach with dignity, fairness and respect at our heart. And we can do both, Presiding Officer. We can have that system with dignity, fairness and respect, but we must also ensure we tackle fraud and error as we do so. I appreciate the marks that members have made over particular technical areas within the bill, which is important to point out how they will, or indeed for some of them will not be used in Scotland. And I appreciate the UK Government's continued discussions on this. It has been difficult and complex to have those discussions, given the fact that the Scottish Government did not see the full provisions before the bill was introduced. And that does make it challenging for this Government, and indeed I think for this Parliament, to be able to discuss, to debate these issues, particularly when they're of such a technical nature. But the Colette Stevenson convener did point out the fact that we will, as a government, need to require, we will require to lodge a supplementary LCM for this bill. My understanding, in response to the other points made by the convener, is we expect the overpayment recovery amendments to be made at the report stage in the House of Lords, but we do not have a public date for that yet. Will absolutely ensure that the committee is kept up to date with any information that we have, and thank members for their time this evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes the debate on the legislative consent motion Public Authorities Fraud, Error and Recovery Bill, UK legislation. It's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is a debate on motion 18077, that's 18077, in the name of Jim Fairley on the legislative consent motion Animal Welfare, Import of Dogs, Cats and Ferrets Bill. I invite members who wish to speak in the debate to press their request to speak buttons, and I call on the Minister to speak to and move the motion.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, despite the lateness of the evening, I am pleased to be leading for the Scottish Government to discuss this, a positive legislative consent memorandum, to give effect in Scotland to the Animal Welfare, Import of Dogs, Cats and Ferrets Bill. I'd like to start by saying that it is regrettable that the Rural Affairs and Islands Committee feels that it has not had the time to fully consider the LCM relating to this bill, and I would emphasise that the Scottish Government has no role in the timetabling of UK bills. And we recognise the concerns of the committee members in relation to their workloads and the ability to scrutinise legislative instruments, as well as undertaking the other aspects of their roles. And just as ministers require detailed preparation, coordination and time to consider legislative instruments to ensure high-quality contributions are made to the Parliamentary Committee, we understand that committee members require the same to ensure that they have time to properly scrutinise items in the committee. At every step, the Government acted promptly and constructively. No meeting was cancelled, no deadline was missed and no information was withheld. In the interest of time, I am happy for members to reach out to me in writing, and I can provide timelines and copies of the letters that I have sent to both committees on this bill, as well as correspondence with Baroness Hayman, obtaining clarification and assurances from the UK Government on some of the proposals within this bill. The RAI Committee have raised the fact that the Welsh Government lodged its LCM on the 21st of May. However, as is my responsibility, I consider it necessary to obtain clarification and assurances from the UK Government regarding some of the proposals contained in the bill to protect this Parliament's right to scrutinise any legislation that is put before this Chamber before confirming support to extend it to Scotland. This took time. I wrote on March the 28th and I did not receive my response until May the 13th, a position of which I had no control, but from my point of view, it was essential that I got that response in order to protect the rights of this Parliament. It is my view that the Scottish Government has given as much notice to the Scottish Parliament as was possible. So this bill will make provision for and in connection with the restricting the importation and the non-commercial movement of dogs, cats and ferrets from third countries on the grounds of animal welfare. Puppies are frequently imported underage and unvaccinated with fraudulent paperwork before being transported and sold to unsuspecting buyers in GB by dealers illegally posing as home breeders. The measures have been strongly called for by many of the main animal welfare organisations, and the Scottish Government supports their introduction. But let me be clear that if the Scottish Parliament does not grant legislative consent to this bill, then it is highly likely that Scotland would be inadvertently enabling routes for increased puppy smuggling. This is why the Scottish Government supports this bill and believes granting legislative consent is the right decision at this time. Yes, I'll take an intervention.
Emma Harper.
I appreciate it's late and I won't take up a lot of time, Minister, but you will be aware that I've done a lot of work over the years about puppies coming through the port of Cairnryan. So will this legislative consent motion help address that, as we've been trying to do that for many years now?
Minister.
I'll be able to come on to that as I go through my comments, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government is, in the interest of pragmatism, is working with other UK administrations to improve the welfare of animals in this area. The changes proposed in the bill address matters of significant public concern for animal welfare, which are within the legislative competence of the Scottish Parliament and require primary legislation to be given effect. These are areas where consistent changes to the legislation in all administrations of the United Kingdom at the same time will be beneficial. Given the freedom of movement of dogs, cats and ferrets within Great Britain, effecting this bill in Scotland will aid enforcement of import requirements by avoiding attempts to circumvent controls in one country by utilising points of entry in another. The bill provides an opportunity to have consistent control over such imports and to assist enforcement agencies to ensure that such unnecessary movements can no longer take place. The Scottish Government fully recognise, however, that for the measures in this particular bill to be successful, it must be introduced consistently across Great Britain. Consistent legislative measures across GB will also greatly assist when it comes to the interpretation and enforcement of new controls. A coordinated GB-wide approach in tackling the issues covered by the Animal Welfare Imports of Dogs, Cats and Ferrets Bill is widely supported and welcomed by many key stakeholders. The bill, as amended in committee in similar terms, including in the way it conferred powers to provisions contained in the previous bill, the Animal Welfare Kept Animals Bill, legislative consent of the Animal Welfare Kept Animals Bill was given by the Scottish Parliament in January 2022. However, the UK Government did not proceed with that bill. I am strongly of the view that allowing the UK Parliament to legislate for all GB administrations in this area is the most timely, efficient and effective way to achieve these important changes, and I move it in my name. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. I now call on Tim Eagle.
Well, thank you, Presiding Officer. The COVID pandemic highlighted further an issue that was already well known, and that surrounded the legal import of dogs, cats and ferrets into the UK. During the pandemic, those imports rose by nearly 60% as demand for puppies rose considerably. But it raised more noticeably that there is a problem with legal entry routes for animals like dogs and cats, and with it, a significant risk to welfare. As I understand it, a single individual can import 5 puppies or kittens non-commercially into the UK. In theory, this would enable 5 individuals in a single vehicle to import 25 puppies or kittens with minimal border checks. The RSPCA and the Cats Protection League have both highlighted that these non-commercial imports have been a significant concern for years, as a major route for illegal puppies and kittens to enter Great Britain. This bill will crack down on puppy and kitten smuggling by closing loopholes exploited by unscrupulous commercial traders. It will ban the import of puppies and kittens under 6 months and dogs and cats that are mutilated or heavily pregnant. It will also address the current abuse of non-commercial rules that compromise animal welfare and biosecurity by making it more difficult and less profitable for traders to fraudulently import animals for sale under the disguise of owners travelling with their own pets. The Scottish Conservatives welcome the bill and the closing of these loopholes and strongly support the motion tonight. But I do impress on the Minister the concerns already raised by my colleague Finlay Carson and ones that he's just touched on himself. The truncated period provided to this Parliament for this LCM and the impact that this has had on parliamentary scrutiny. Whether we... yes, I'll take an intervention.
Mrs Wishart.
I thank Tim Eagle for taking my intervention, and I think he's coming on to the point of principle that Finlay Carson made earlier today, that this legislation should have had more time to be scrutinised by the Rural Affairs and Islands Committee, of which he's the convener. And while I have no concern about the legislation in question, which originated from my Liberal Democrat MP colleague Danny Chambers, and notwithstanding what the Minister has just said, does Tim Eagle agree with me that in future committees must be given greater time to ensure that they can fulfil the role as effective bodies to scrutinise legislation?
Tim Eagle.
I absolutely agree with you. And I wanted to be careful tonight because Finlay Carson, my colleague, made quite a good point about this earlier on. But the bill actually in itself, I think, is a really important one and one that I hope the whole chamber can get behind. But, as I said, that truncated period provided to this Parliament for this LCM by the SNP has had an effect on parliamentary scrutiny, and whether or not we agree with the content, it is only right and fair that the processes for which this building was built are allowed the time they need. And it is a scar on what is a good bill that in this instance, a good LCM I should say, in this instance that has not occurred. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Eagle. I now call on Rhoda Grant.
My mic's not on? Oh, it's on. Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Animal Welfare Import of Dogs, Cats and Ferrets Bill, UK legislation proposes to make puppy and kitten smuggling more difficult by banning the import of puppies and kittens under 6 months and improving animal welfare by banning the imports of cats and dogs that have been mutilated or are heavily pregnant. It will also close loopholes, making it more difficult for illegal traders to import animals posing as pet owners travelling with their own animals. And we've all heard stories of people being duped into buying pets that have been illegally imported. These animals are seldom in good health and they've not been inoculated, often removed from their mothers when they're too young. And when a breed is sought after, these animals can be really expensive to buy, making it a lucrative trade for criminals. And sadly, there's even more cost for buyers and vet fees for sick animals. And in the worst case scenario, these pets may die because their illness cannot be treated. The Cat Protection League briefing told us that 4% of all cats purchased in a one-year period were bought from abroad, possibly reflecting the increase in demand for specific breeds. And while 4% doesn't seem very much, it equates to 65,000 cats. In this Parliament, we have members' bills looking at dog sales and dog theft, indicating that the trade in dogs is problematic and attractive to criminals. All these bills are worthy, but if we're being honest, it's a piecemeal approach to an issue that needs a more comprehensive approach. Government should consider consolidating legislation and ensuring the law can deal with the illegal trade of pets. However, this bill will make it more difficult to illegally import animals and make the trade less lucrative, which is a positive outcome. This will help improve animal welfare and protect buyers from purchasing animals that would have been bred, that have not been bred properly and may have been subject to cruelty and neglect. So while the LCM itself is to be welcomed, there are concerns about the process surrounding this LCM and the lack of time we have had to deal with it. And this meant that the Rural and Islands Committee was not able to scrutinise the legislation. The Scottish Government, rather than providing an explanation as to why this was, or offering reassurance that they would ensure that this didn't happen again, they have become defensive and dismissive, and doubling down on that tonight is really not helpful. Yep.
Minister.
I would refute the fact that the Government has become defensive. I would give the fact to the member that what we're doing is laying out the facts as they happened for us as well as for the committee.
Rhoda Grant.
I don't believe the facts that have been laid out explain why this LCM came so late to our committee. And if we're to carry out our role as parliamentarians, we have to scrutinise all legislation, no matter how well-meaning. And we need to find a better way of processing this type of legislation to allow the Parliament to carry out that role properly. So I hope that the Scottish Government will now take on board the concerns of the committee and take steps to deal with it, making sure it will never happen again. But that doesn't alter the fact that this legislation provides the opportunity to improve animal welfare and discourage the illegal trade in animals, and I would urge the Parliament to support it.
Thank you, Ms Grant. And I call Christine Graham.
Oh, thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I declare an interest as convener of the cross-party group of animal welfare, and I thank you indeed for the short contribution in support of this LCM, which flows from a UK private member's bill setting out, inter alia, to crack down on the illegal puppy trade through smuggling from disreputable sources, including puppy factory farms, with serious organised crime often at the root of this cruel trade. Because, as well as misery for the animal, there are big bucks to be made, thousands for a puppy. And in passing, I also welcome its extension to kittens. The UK Members' Bill echoes my own attempts in my recent Welfare of Dogs Scotland Act to at least put a dent in that dreadful trafficking. The UK Bill also sets out, as some have said, to end mutilation of these companion animals, done, and painfully at that, to fit in with fashion, cropped ears, docking tails, and I'm sure we all find these actions abhorrent. Finally, I would hope that DEFRA would now take this opportunity to accelerate establishing a UK-wide microchipping database of dogs, an issue I have long pursued, which would provide traceability and would be another significant component in ending this miserable trade. And I thank you again, Presiding Officer, and urge members to support this LCM.
Thank you, Ms Graham, and I call on the Minister to wind up.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, improving the lives of Scotland's animals is something that I am strongly committed to, and I've been very pleased that over the last few years this Government has been able to deliver or support many groundbreaking and innovative improvements in this area. As for the timings, regardless of the contribution by Tim Eagle and Rhoda Grant, this Government has not missed a single deadline and was subject to delays by the UK Government process. Turning to this bill in particular, I know that many of us have been appalled at the conditions in which too many dogs, cats and ferrets have been brought into this country by unscrupulous actors. The health and welfare of these animals is often shockingly poor, and they are usually purchased by well-intentioned owners who then find themselves caring for sick animals and saddled with high vet bills or worse, with incurably ill pets who have to be euthanised, causing much distress. Presiding Officer, as this Parliament knows, I have myself been just as susceptible to the entreaties of a family member falling in love with an animal who then became from a suspect background, and I know all too well the upset that arise when that pet had to be put down. So these issues have been a concern of welfare groups and this Government for some time, but it have always been clear that action was needed GB-wide to avoid backdoor entry of sick and mutilated animals into the country. This Government had indicated support for this bill on the 2 previous occasions it was proposed in the UK Parliament, and we were extremely disappointed that it failed due to upheaval in the UK Government at that time. We are therefore pleased it has been introduced again and strongly urge this Parliament to support it and allow a UK-wide approach to tackling this horrendous trade which perpetuates an industry of poor welfare companion animals. Presiding Officer, legislative consent processes like this show that we can achieve what we can achieve when parliaments and governments work together on a cause of common concern and interest for the benefit of Scotland's people, communities and, in this case, its animals. So I would like to reiterate once again that this bill respects the devolved competence, but the reality is, if we were an independent country, we would not need this LCM. Therefore, I move that the Parliament backs this motion and grants legislative consent to the relevant clauses in this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the debate on legislative consent motion, Animal Welfare, Import of Dogs, Cats and Ferrets Bill, UK legislation. It's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of legislative consent motion 18078 in the name of James Hepburn on absent voting, elections in Scotland and Wales Bill, UK legislation. And I call on the Minister to speak to and move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. And I call Martin Whitfield.
Grateful, Presiding Officer. My apologies to the Chamber and those watching that I detained slightly longer before decision time because of the absent voting, elections in Scotland and Wales Bill. The Chamber will have, if they are very up to date, the report from the Standards Procedure and Public Appointments Committee regarding this private members' bill that is passing through the House of Commons and into the House of Lords, guided by Tracy Gilbert MP, in which we recommend agreement to this LCM. However, just to ensure that everything is above board and as transparent as we want and seek to be here in Scotland, it is right to say that the Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee, although not producing a report, did have some questions with regard to this matter, and the convener wrote today to the Scottish Government posing 2 questions on how decisions would be made regarding which authority will exercise power, and also how the Scottish Government intends to facilitate scrutiny by us here, the Scottish Parliament, of the policy position in these regulations. And can I compliment the Government, and in particular the Minister for Parliamentary Affairs and Shona Robinson MSP, for being able to respond also today to these 2 outstanding matters and confirming the Scottish Government's position on it, which in no way alters the committee's view that consent should be given to the LCM. I'm grateful for your time.
Thank you, Mr Whitfield. Minister.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Let me briefly, first of all, thank Martin Whitfield for giving me the opportunity to speak a little more, and I won't speak for long in relation to the legislative consent motion. I should, in the first instance, say it was this Government's preference that there was a Section 30 order to transfer responsibility to this Parliament to legislate for this matter. That was the approach that I and the Government would have preferred, but unfortunately the UK Government wouldn't agree, and I think that's regrettable. But I am very grateful, genuinely grateful to Tracy Gilbert MP for taking forward this bill, because it is, I think, important that we make it as straightforward as possible for voters in Scotland to be able to apply for a postal or proxy vote, and this bill, should it pass through the UK Parliament, will achieve such. Can I also thank Mr Whitfield and his committee for the report that they have laid before Parliament. I'm sure everyone has read it as assiduously as I have, and they have considered this matter at pace. I'm grateful for that. Mr Whitfield has made the point that the Government received a copy of a letter from the Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee this morning asking a couple of questions, and as Mr Whitfield has mentioned, I have responded to that letter today. I should say I would have been very happy to go to the committee to have spoken to the matter, but they have written to me and I have responded today. And maybe I should place on record some of the points that have been raised with me by the committee and how I have responded. The first point that was raised by the committee was asking how it will be decided which government will exercise delegated powers set out in the bill. I can say to Parliament that the Scottish Government intends to make the regulations under the power in the bill. These will be subject to agreement by the UK Government, but they will be laid in the Scottish Parliament in the usual way. The committee also asked how Will scrutiny by the Scottish Parliament, the policy position of these regulations, be ensured where the power is exercised by a Minister of the Crown? The Scottish Government intends to exercise these powers to implement online absent voting applications for devolved Scottish elections. We would expect any future changes by a Minister to be the subject of engagement and agreement. Scottish Ministers would seek to ensure that the Scottish Parliament has the opportunity to assess any changes in good time. We do recognise the importance of parliamentary scrutiny, and we will make sure that it is possible in this case. And with that, I would urge Parliament to agree to the motion in my name.
Thank you, Minister. And the question on this motion will be put at decision time. The next item of business is consideration of business motion 18100 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out a business programme, and I call on the Minister to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. No member has asked to speak to the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 18100 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is consideration of Parliamentary Bureau motion 18101 on approval of an SSI, and I ask Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister, and I call on Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This SSI makes a small but far-reaching change to the home detention curfew regime. HDC is where eligible prisoners are released from custody subject to licence conditions into the community. At the moment, a prisoner can get HDC once they've served a quarter of their sentence. This SSI reduces that to a mere 15%. So a prisoner sentenced to 2 years in prison would now be eligible for HDC after just 3.5 months. Now, we all know that due to a lack of any overarching strategy alongside an inability to build capacity, our prisons are running way over capacity. But absent any such strategy, the SNP knee-jerks its response. So last summer, and again earlier this year, the SNP opened the gates and let hundreds of prisoners out early. Despite this, by February 2025, prison numbers exceeded the pre-summer release figure by almost 100, not least because more than 1 in 10 of the original cohort were back behind bars within weeks. Now, the SNP tried putting more people on community service, yet almost 30,000 such orders have been breached in the last decade or so. Roughly 8,000 of those got the jail for their breach, adding to the numbers. Then the SNP changed the law such that short-term prisoners would automatically be released after serving just 40% of their sentence, despite evidence showing too little time in prison can prejudice proper rehabilitation. Yet the prison population remains stubbornly high. So clearly, this SSI is just the latest knee-jerk attempt to reduce the prison population. And like these others, we have been given no evidence that it actually will either aid rehabilitation or ultimately reduce the prison population. But crucially, Presiding Officer, there is no consideration of the victims of crime. Indeed, the Cabinet Secretary told the Justice Committee that no specific research has been undertaken regarding the impact this SSI may have on victims. Now, Presiding Officer, last month I raised the case of violent thug Andrew Brown, who just 1 year into a 4-year sentence for repeatedly subjecting Demi Hanaway to appalling mental and physical abuse, even when she was pregnant, will get home leave. That's under the current rules. If colleagues vote to pass this SSI today, they are voting to allow criminals like Brown to be eligible for HDC after 7 months. The mere thought disgusts me, Presiding Officer, and any other MSP who feels the same must vote against this SSI tonight.
Thank you, Mr Kerr, and I call on the Cabinet Secretary to respond.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I will confine my remarks quite tightly and strictly to the substance of the statutory instrument before us tonight. I would like to thank Parliament clerks and indeed committee members for accommodating the scrutiny of this SSI with only the minimum period of 40 days. I trust that Parliament will support these proposals, which will allow completion of the SSI process before recess. And this will ensure that the Scottish Prison Service, Justice Social Work and partners have increased time to prepare for the proposed changes coming into force on the 20th of October. Now, these planned changes are a programme for Government Commitment 24 to 25, which contribute to the efforts to effectively balance the use of custody and community alternatives whilst supporting a sustainable prison population. And home detention curfew is a well-established part of our justice system, which provides structured and managed transition for individuals being released back into the community. And indeed, the legislation that home detention curfew is located in is the Criminal Proceedings Scotland Act 1993, introduced by a former Tory government. I appreciate that 1993, while I was at my work as a social worker, that Mr Kerr was perhaps still at school. And the evidence shows that managed reintegration is far more effective than unplanned releases. And there is also really important to put on the record, Presiding Officer, that release and home detention curfew is underpinned by individualised risk assessment and includes clear licence conditions, including a curfew and electronic monitoring. There is no automatic right to home detention curfew. Decisions on HDC release are made by the SPS following careful consideration of each case, including evidence provided by Justice Social Work and Police Scotland. And I reassure members that the SSI does not alter any of the aspects of risk assessment within the HDC process. It doesn't alter any of the statutory exclusions in any shape or form. Yes, if I've got time, Presiding Officer.
Liam Kerr.
I'm very grateful. The Cabinet Secretary, in the Cabinet Secretary's own words, no research has been done on the impact of this on victims. And of course, last summer, only 2% of victims were told about the early release. Given that, surely the right thing to do today is to take these plans back to the drawing board, do the research and carry out a proper consultation so we can understand the impact on victims.
Yeah. In conclusion, Cabinet Secretary.
In conclusion, Presiding Officer, there is decades of research that supports what works with the reintegration of offenders to return to their community. And I also shared with committee when I gave evidence that the recall rate was low at 7%, and any registered victim on the victim notification scheme would be informed if someone was to be released on home detention curfew. So it is the case that all individuals will continue to be fully assessed, and the SSI proposes changes to 2 of the criteria. There is a range of criteria, statutory criteria, that must be met, and this realignment of policy is in response to previous changes that Parliament made to the release of short-term prisoners. And I move the SSI, Presiding Officer, and I would encourage members to support it.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. The question on this motion will be put at decision time. The next item of business is consideration of Parliamentary Bureau Motion 18102 on designation of a lead committee. And I ask Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. And the question on this motion will be put at decision time.